Ladies and gentlemen, we had some breaking news happen today on a Sunday of all days. When it comes to the Microsoft Activision Blizzard situation, this thing is definitely winding down, and I think we are about to see the grand conclusion to this year-and-a-half long saga, and today's event certainly shows that we are right there and this entire closing is imminent because Sony has seemingly given in to signing that deal that Microsoft has been waving around. Brad Smith up on stage with the agreement in his pocket, ready to be signed at any time for Call of Duty and even other Activision Blizzard games. Well, we'll discuss that because it seems like the terms have changed, which you kind of expect when one side loses basically all of their leverage. And something tells me it wasn't a great day for Jim Ryan. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button. Helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawn Wave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. Let's head over here to The Verge, where they did collect the different tweets that were sent out, as well as some additional information based on the agreement that was signed, along with a confirmation from Microsoft. But we can see Phil Spencer saying, "We are pleased to announce that Microsoft and PlayStation have signed a binding agreement to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation following the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. We look forward to a future where players globally have more choice to play their favorite games." Now, if you remember, Sony was the holdout for this deal, where we saw Nintendo go, "Oh yeah, we'll sign that. We'll take Call of Duty. We didn't have it. Now you're going to provide it to us for 10 years? All right, sure." NVIDIA was ecstatic seemingly to do it so that they had access to it through their GeForce Now cloud streaming. Valve didn't really care too much. They just said, Microsoft's going to do what Microsoft's going to do. We make a ton of money on Steam, so if they want to go where really the PC gamers are, they'll put it on Steam. And that was kind of that, right? But Sony, Jim Ryan, they didn't care about deals. They said they just want to block this acquisition. That was apparently what Jim Ryan said in court, and has documented the whole thing, right? But now, as we can see with Phil Spencer and even Brad Smith quote tweeting Phil Spencer, saying, "From day one of this acquisition, we've been committed to addressing the concerns of regulators, platform, and game developers, and consumers. Even after we cross the finish line for this deal's approval, we will remain focused on ensuring that Call of Duty remains available on multiple platforms, many people as possible they can reach, etc., etc. there." So it does appear that we will continue to see Call of Duty on PlayStation, kind of as expected, at least based on the writing here for the next 10 years, right? And I'm looking at this acquisition, all right, and it becomes very interesting because of the franchises that are now going to Microsoft. Older intellectual properties that do have some nostalgic value to them, but in this case, the deal changed slightly. All right, so this was pointed out and confirmed here to The Verge, where they say that the 10-year commitment that is now in place for Call of Duty is indeed just for Call of Duty. It's basically what Nintendo was able to get, and I guess NVIDIA, because that was just about Call of Duty. Whereas before, based on this email here with Jim Ryan, this was Phil Spencer to Jim Ryan. Remember all of the documents and stuff that were basically just being shown to the world during these hearings. Some were good for Microsoft, some were not so good based on what was being said. But in this instance, Phil Spencer's writing to Jim Ryan on May 23rd, discussing plans for after the acquisition goes through. This where he says, "As you recall, on January 31st, 2022, I sent you a written agreement with my signature memorializing Microsoft's commitments to Sony. Among other things, the proposed agreement provided that Microsoft would keep all existing Activision console titles on Sony, including future versions in the Call of Duty franchise or any other current Activision franchise on Sony through December 31st, 2027. Said before, this is the right thing to do for gamers and for the industry, and I stand by that." So that would have gone, from there, 5.5 years, right? And let's say they wanted to make another Tony Hawk Pro Skater game, because if you look at 1 and 2, it's the best selling one in the franchise, so you figure, why wouldn't they? But then Vicarious Visions got absorbed into Blizzard so they could help get Diablo 2 and Diablo 4 out the door. Well, those are done, so hey, maybe there's another Tony Hawk Pro Skater in the works. That'd be something, right? But that would then go on PlayStation because it is a franchise that is currently available and present on the PlayStation. So there you go. At least if they decide to release it before December 31st, 2027, we would assume that there would be a PlayStation 5 version of some kind for it. But now with this deal, it's just Call of Duty, which means that Crash Bandicoot and Tony Hawk would pretty much become Microsoft exclusive games. So they would use it for Game Pass, Xbox, PC, all of that, but they're not necessarily bound to having to put it on PlayStation. Now they still may, because they're not massive franchises. Like, they're not necessarily going to come in and by themselves move the needle for Xbox like Starfield will, right? Like Call of Duty will. Even as a multi-platform game, just having the marketing rights for it at that point, which they're going to put Call of Duty next to the Xbox logo every chance they can going forward, as soon as they're allowed, because I think Sony still has some marketing stuff through 2024, but that's going to be really big for them. However, now looking at something like Tony Hawk and Crash Bandicoot, you may see Microsoft still release multi-platform games in those franchises, maybe to save face with regulators, because something tells me Microsoft may be seeing them again down the line. I know this is a big-time acquisition, right? I mean, it's huge. It's like $70 billion, right? Microsoft still could show up and want to buy other publishers, other developers, and I feel like Microsoft is set up nicely now to where they don't really need to go shopping again. But based on what happened with Activision Blizzard, the opportunity may come to Microsoft. Microsoft didn't go out looking for Activision Blizzard. Activision Blizzard came and found Microsoft. So there's always the chance that Capcom or Sega or Square, maybe they do want to be bought and they go out looking. And Microsoft realizes, well, it's either us or it's Apple or Tencent or Amazon. So take your pick. But to me, at this point, it just seems like Sony looked around and realized that the writing was on the wall. They certainly had much more leverage when the CMA was working to block the deal and seek out all these different concessions, and the FTC trying to do something. I mean, they showed up with such a poor argument. They got slapped around in court, and once they got denied twice in 1 week, it was pretty clear that Microsoft was ready to roll with this deal, and Sony thought, well, we might as well at least lock in Call of Duty for 10 years, because that's the biggest thing they're concerned about here. I mean, sure, Crash Bandicoot, Tony Hawk, maybe a Guitar Hero revival or something like that, but Call of Duty is the big money for them. There was an interesting stat that was brought up on Twitter, I believe by Steven Totillo, mentioning that in the US, Call of Duty is the most downloaded game on the PlayStation 5, like just in general, right? And then you go down a bit further, and it's Call of Duty on the PS4, and then Minecraft. So in like the top 4 spots on the PlayStation, 3 of them are taken up by Microsoft when this deal goes through, making them one of the biggest third-party developers and publishers for Sony at that time. So I'm sure they looked at those charts, realized how many PlayStation Plus subscriptions were tied to that, because they've made mention that people on PlayStation, there are many, many people who buy maybe a sports game, but definitely Call of Duty every year, and they re-up their PlayStation Plus subscription in order to play it. So with the week coming up, I kind of expect Microsoft to have some formal announcement that they have closed the deal, although it has been mentioned that the CMA, while they are trying to work things out with Microsoft, could end up going past that July 18th date, and maybe Microsoft and Activision are able to negotiate a more temporary extension, or a very small extension, right, for any paperwork that needs to be filed, and it's taking longer than you would need it to. In that case, maybe they extend it to the end of July or something, and that's enough just to get the CMA all worked out with formal agreements in place for any kind of concessions like spinning off streaming rights in the UK. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I think we're going to hear from Microsoft this week one way or the other, and I think they close this deal, and probably, I'll say by the end of July, yes, Microsoft will own Activision Blizzard, and then we'll see what plans they have in the next year or two when it comes to maybe franchises they can revive, or plans around Call of Duty and what they're going to do with things like the marketing. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. With Sony holding out so long, Jim Ryan really trying to block this deal, end up actually losing out on part of the original deal when it came to other Activision Blizzard franchises. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.